coming. First, I would like to say that I was shocked by the killing of a young man yesterday during the protest to mark the violent dispersal by security forces of the 3rd June pro-democracy sitting in Khartoum in 2019. I and many others had called for restraint yesterday. However, it seems that this call was not heeded, and according to our information, live ammunition was used to disperse protesters. There can be no justification for firing live ammunition at unarmed protesters. There can be no justification, and I insist on that. This young man reportedly died after he was shot in the chest. This is a tragedy. Each of these deaths is a tragedy for Sudan. Another young man whose family are in mourning today. His killing must be investigated immediately and the perpetrators prosecuted. I will be following up on this and other cases of human rights violations in my ongoing engagement with the authorities. Today marks the conclusion of my second visit to Khartoum in my capacity as United Nations expert on human rights in Sudan. I would like to express my appreciation to the authorities for their cooperation and for facilitating my visit. The main purpose of this visit was to continue my engagement with the authorities on human rights concerns linked to the coup, follow up on the recommendations I made at the end of my last visit in February, and hear from civil society and victims of human rights violations. The outcome of this visit will also contribute to the enhanced interactive dialogue on Sudan that will take place on 15 June during the 5th session of the Human Rights Council, at which the Council will consider the comprehensive written report on the human rights situation in Sudan that I prepared in collaboration with the Joint Human Rights Office in Sudan. The report will be made public on 7th June. During this visit, I met with the ministers of, the acting ministers of Foreign Affairs and Justice, the acting Attorney General, as well as the National Monitoring, Reporting, and Follow-up Mechanism. Unfortunately, General Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo was not available to meet with me, but I have received just before coming indication that this may take place sometime this afternoon. I have a meeting scheduled with Lieutenant General Abdul Fattah al-Burhan, Chairman of the Sovereign Council, before I leave this afternoon. I also met with civil society representatives, human rights defenders, victims of human rights violations and their families, UN officials, and members of the diplomatic corps. I was humbled and moved by the courage and determination of the human rights defenders and the victims of human rights violations and their families amid the challenges they face. Their experiences underline the complexity and magnitude of the human rights challenges confronted by the Sudanese people and the persistent gaps in accountability. In my meetings with the authorities, I welcome the lifting of the state of emergency and release of detainees arrested under emergency legislation, as well as the release last month of high-profile officials affiliated with the dismantling committee. However, I stress that more bold and concrete action are needed to improve the human rights situation and build confidence. I urge them to release all persons arrested under the emergency legislation, as was recommended by the Security and Defense Council, provide clear and public confirmation that the emergency decree of 24 December, which was linked to the duration of the state of emergency, is no longer valid, to ensure a definitive end to the use of excessive force against protesters and arbitrary arrest and detention, and ensure there is visible progress in ongoing investigation into human rights violations and that they are conducted in line with international law and standards. I flagged my deep concern at the human rights violations documented since the coup. It is simply unacceptable that 99 people have been killed and more than 5,000 injured as a result of excessive use of force by the joint security forces responding to protests. I also raised my concern at the arbitrary and mass arrest and often incommunicado detention of resistance committee members, protesters, activists, media professionals, and others in the context of protests. Sexual and gender-based violence and acts of torture and ill-treatment in the course of arrest and during detention, and lack of fair trial and due process guarantees. Regarding accountability, I was informed that the investigation committee set up by the authorities to investigate human rights violations committed since the coup has confirmed 4 cases of sexual violence in the context of the protests and has made progress in investigation into the killing of protesters. However, I stressed to the authorities the need to expedite the process and provide information to the public on the committee's progress. In the report to the Human Rights Council, I included reference to information provided by the authorities in February on the number of police officers killed and injured during protests. I understand that the case of Mohammed Adam, known as Tupac, a young protester arrested on suspicion of his involvement in the death of a police brigadier general during a protest in January, whose family I met when I was here in February, has now moved to trial. I urge the authorities to ensure the right of all those prosecuted to a fair trial. I also share my concern over the retrogression in the enjoyment of economic and social rights since the coup, due to the deterioration in the economy, political instability, increased prices, and the threat of poor harvest this year, which are forecast to dramatically increase the number of people living in poverty. I call on the authorities to take concrete steps to prevent this from happening, using the maximum available resources and by seeking international support as appropriate. I also communicated my concern in relation to intercommunal conflicts and large-scale attacks against civilians in Darfur, including the events of 22nd to 24th April in Training that claimed the lives of at least 172 people, almost from the Masalit tribe, and displaced thousands. These events must be investigated fully, and serious and comprehensive efforts taken to restore peace and hold those responsible to account. Implementation of the security arrangement envisaged in the Juba Peace Agreement needs to be accelerated and more joint security forces deployed in hotspot areas in Darfur to protect civilians and including internally displaced people, including women and children. In conclusion, I encourage all Sudanese to contribute to efforts toward a political settlement and resumption of the important legal and institutional reforms started by the transitional government. In this respect, I would like to underline that any political initiatives must be founded on human rights if they are to succeed and include justice and reparation for victims and accountability for those responsible for human rights violations. There should also be a strong commitment to the protection of civilians. Once again, I thank you for taking your time to meet with me. Thank you also to the UN Joint Office in Sudan for their continued support to my mandate, and thanks to all of you here today. May peace and prosperity come soon to this beautiful country. Shukran jazilan.